Imagine the world at 3 in the morning. Most of the city has gone dark, the frenetic energy of the day dissolved into the quiet rhythm of sleep. But there is one place where the lights never truly fade, where time seems to suspend itself in a bath of amber light and sterile air. The hospital. Listen to the rain against the glass. It's a heavy, washing sound. Inside here, the world is separated by layers of brick and double-paned windows. This is a sanctuary. It is designed to be the safest place on earth. When we are at our most vulnerable, when our bodies fail us, when consciousness slips away, and we are left defenseless in a hospital bed, we hand over absolute control to strangers. We trust that the people walking these linoleum halls in soft-soled shoes are devoted entirely to our survival. Consider the psychology of that trust. It is not earned over years. It is granted instantly upon admission. You close your eyes, drifting into the haze of medication, believing that the figure standing over you in the semi-darkness is a guardian. You believe this because you have to. To believe otherwise would be a nightmare, too heavy to carry. If you find comfort in these deep dives into the human shadow, please subscribe to our channel. Also, like and share the video to your friends. It ensures these calm nighttime discoveries will keep coming to you as the world sleeps. We assume that the systems in place, the charts, the alarms, the supervisors, are a fortress protecting us. We assume that medicine is a profession drawn only from the well of empathy. But tonight, as the rain falls and the monitors beep in their slow, hypnotic cadence, we are going to examine a case that challenges that fundamental assumption. This is a sleep story for those who find comfort in the truth, no matter how dark, and for those who want to understand the machinery of a cold case that remained frozen in plain sight for nearly 2 decades. This is not a story about violence in the way you might expect. There are no weapons drawn in anger, no shouts in the dark. Instead, this is a story about silence. It is about the quietest, most efficient predator to ever walk the halls of the American medical system. It is a forensic science puzzle where the pieces were not scattered on a floor, but logged, digitally and meticulously, in a computer system that everyone looked at, but no one truly saw. Let's focus our attention on a specific figure. He moves through the corridors of a hospital in New Jersey. He is unremarkable. If you passed him near the vending machines or saw him charting at the nurse's station, your eyes would slide right over him. He is average height, with a receding hairline and a soft, unobtrusive voice. He is a father. He is a Navy veteran. To his colleagues, he is the guy who picks up the extra shifts when no one else will. He is the one who brings you a warm blanket before you even realize you are shivering. This man held the hands of the dying. When families were too exhausted to stay, or when a patient had no one left in the world, he was the one sitting by the bedside, watching the vitals, adjusting the pillows. He was considered the most reliable nurse on the floor, a savior in scrubs, and yet this man is mathematically the most prolific serial killer in recorded history. This is the impossible contradiction. How can 2 realities exist in the same space? How can a man be the gentle healer who buys coffee for the secretaries and simultaneously be a biological weapon deployed against the helpless? The human brain struggles with this. We want our monsters to look like monsters. We want them to snarl. We want them to be obviously broken. But in the field of criminal psychology, we learn that the most dangerous individuals are those who have perfected the mask of sanity. They don't break the social contract. They mimic it. For 16 years, across 9 different hospitals, the alarms rang. Patients flatlined. Codes were called. Doctors rushed in with crash carts, paddles charged, shouting clear. And in the corner of those chaotic rooms, standing quietly with his hands clasped, was the nurse who had just administered the medication that stopped the heart. He wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was part of the rescue team. He killed, by conservative estimates, hundreds of people. And for 16 years, he drove home after his shift, listened to the radio, perhaps stopped for groceries, and slept soundly in his bed. As we drive through this narrative together, imagine you are sitting in the passenger seat of a detective's unmarked car. The windshield wipers are fighting the rain. We are parked outside the emergency room entrance, watching the shift change. You see the nurses walking out, looking tired, carrying their tote bags. You see the new shift walking in. Which one is he? The terrifying answer is that he is the one you would pick to take care of your mother. He is the one you would trust. Now, I want you to pay attention to something specific. A detail that seems mundane, but is actually the smoking gun of this entire investigation. Watch the nurse's station. In modern hospitals, drugs are not just left in unlocked cabinets. They are stored in an automated dispensing cabinet called a Pyxis machine. It looks a bit like an ATM mixed with a vending machine. To get medication out, a nurse must log in with a unique fingerprint or ID, select the patient, and select the drug. The machine opens a specific drawer, and the nurse takes the pill or the vial. Every single interaction is time-stamped. Every drawer opening is recorded. This is the evidence. This is the digital footprint. For 16 years, the clues weren't in the bodies. The bodies were cremated or buried. The deaths attributed to cardiac arrest or respiratory failure, generic terms that mask the truth. The clues were hidden in the silence of the Pyxis machine. Here is the question I want you to hold in your mind as you relax into your pillow. If the system records everything, how did he get away with it for so long? This creates a narrative gap that is uncomfortable. We are taught that computers don't lie. We are taught that data is objective. But data requires interpretation. The Pyxis machine was screaming, day after day, year after year, that something was wrong. It showed withdrawals of lethal medications, digoxin, insulin, at times when no doctor had ordered them. It showed cancellations. It showed a pattern of behavior that, if laid out on a graph, would look like a jagged mountain range of death, but no one connected the dots. Why? Because the human mind is prone to what we call confirmation bias. The administrators saw a hard-working nurse. The doctors saw a helpful assistant. When the data contradicted their reality, they ignored the data. They displaced the anxiety. They reasoned that it must be a glitch, a mistake, a harmless error. This is where the noir aspect of our story takes root. It isn't about a detective chasing a suspect down an alleyway. It is about the administrative blindness that allowed a predator to turn a hospital into a hunting ground. It is about the banality of evil buried in spreadsheets and shift logs. Let's look closer at the weapon of choice. It wasn't a knife or a gun. It was digoxin. Digoxin is a medication derived from the foxglove plant. In the right doses, it is a miracle. It helps the heart beat stronger and with a more regular rhythm. It is used to treat heart failure. But the margin for error is razor thin. It is a drug with a narrow therapeutic index. If you give too much, the heart doesn't just beat stronger. It begins to beat chaotically. The electrical signals that tell the heart muscle to contract go haywire. The patient might feel nausea, see halos around lights, and then the heart simply stops. Or it fibrillates, quivering like a bag of worms, unable to pump blood. To a doctor rushing into the room at 3 a.m., a digoxin overdose looks almost exactly like a natural heart attack, especially if the patient is already elderly or sick. There is no blood spatter. There is no bruising. The forensic investigation required to detect a digoxin overdose involves specific toxicology screens that are rarely run unless foul play is suspected. And why would anyone suspect foul play in a sanctuary? The killer knew this. He relied on the assumption of goodness. He weaponized the compassion of his colleagues against them. He knew that when a patient crashed, the team would focus on saving the life, not investigating the nurse standing quietly in the corner. But here is the microhook, the strange detail that eventually cracked the facade. Among the hundreds of withdrawals from the Pyxis machine, there was a peculiar behavior. The killer would often request a medication. The drawer would open, and then he would immediately hit cancel. The machine would record canceled transaction. Why? If he canceled it, he didn't take the drug, right? That is what the administrators thought. That is what the pharmacists thought. He made a mistake. He selected the wrong patient. He canceled it. But they were wrong. The mechanics of the drawer allowed for a split second of opportunity. A ghost in the machine. A trick of the hand that fooled the digital eye. As we settle in to understand this investigation, ask yourself, how much of your safety relies on people simply doing what they are supposed to do? And what happens when someone realizes that the systems we trust are actually full of holes? Tonight, we will walk the floors of the Somerset Medical Center. We will look over the shoulder of the detectives who finally decided to look at the math. We will meet the one person, the protagonist, a nurse named Amy, who had to face the impossible reality that her best friend, the man she loved like a brother, was a monster. But first, we must understand the landscape of the hospital at night, the quiet beeping, the rain, the perfect place to hide. Let us move away from the abstract concept of a killer and step into the reality of the workplace. To understand the magnitude of what happened, we must first appreciate the aggressive normalcy of the Somerset Medical Center. When you think of a forensic investigation, your mind likely goes to crime scene tape and flashing lights. But true crime, especially in the medical field, rarely starts with a bang. It starts with paperwork. It starts with the smell of stale coffee in a break room at 2 a.m. It starts with the squeak of rubber shoes on polished linoleum and the quiet, crushing weight of burnout. Somerset was not a dungeon. It was a community hospital in New Jersey, a place of healing where people brought their sick parents and their feverish children. The staff there were not villains. They were exhausted professionals trying to keep a complex system running. They were dealing with understaffing, budget cuts, and the endless rotation of shifts that confuse the body's natural circadian rhythm. In this environment, a good nurse is defined very specifically. It isn't necessarily the one who knows the most obscure medical trivia. It is the one who shows up. It is the one who doesn't call in sick on a holiday. It is the one who walks into a room where a patient has soiled themselves and cleans it up without a word of complaint. This is the environment where Charles Cullen thrived. I want you to build a profile in your mind, not of a monster, but of a colleague. If you worked at Somerset, Charles was the guy you were relieved to see on the schedule. He was soft-spoken, almost to a fault. He had a quality of stillness about him that could be mistaken for calmness. He wore a half-smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes, which colleagues interpreted as a sort of melancholic kindness. He was a sad dad. That was the vibe. He had personal troubles, a messy divorce, custody issues, financial strain, and he wore these troubles like a heavy coat. In the maternal, empathetic culture of nursing, this didn't make him a suspect. It made him a project. The other nurses wanted to mother him. They wanted to fix him. They shared their lunches with him. They listened to his quiet complaints about child support payments. He was the good nurse. And because he was perceived as good, because he was perceived as struggling but trying his best, he was granted a level of invisibility that is essential for a predator. He was part of the furniture. Ask yourself, as you drift deeper into this sleep story, who are the people in your life that you trust simply because they are always there? We often mistake proximity for loyalty. We assume that because someone is helpful, they are harmless. It is a cognitive shortcut the brain takes to save energy. But in this case, that shortcut was a fatal error. Now, let's introduce the variable that changes everything. The patient, Reverend Florian Gall. I want you to picture him clearly. He is not a statistic in a cold case file. He is a man with a life, a history, a voice. He was a 68-year-old priest, a man of faith who had spent his life offering comfort to others. He had come to Somerset Medical Center not for a tragedy, but for a routine maintenance of the body. He had pneumonia and a heart condition, yes, but he was recovering. This is the "it could happen to you" moment. Reverend Gall was past the danger zone. He had weathered the storm of his illness and was sailing into the calm waters of recovery. He was sitting up in bed. He was joking with the nurses about the hospital food. He was asking for the morning newspaper. The expectation was discharge. The plan was to go home. There is a specific comfort in watching a patient get better. It validates the work of the doctors and nurses. It restores order to the universe. When you see the color return to a patient's cheeks, when the monitors settle into a steady, boring rhythm, you relax. Your guard goes down. In the chess game of criminal psychology, this is the moment the opponent waits for. The moment of relaxation. Charles Cullen was assigned to the critical care unit where Reverend Gall was resting. It was a quiet night, the kind of night where nurses catch up on charting and talk about their weekend plans. Charles checked on the Reverend. He checked the vitals. He adjusted the sheets. There was no argument. There was no motive in the traditional sense. Reverend Gall had never wronged Charles Cullen. They were strangers. And this is where the noir element of our story becomes truly terrifying. In most crimes, there is a transaction: passion, greed, revenge. Here, there was only a void, a compulsion to control the line between life and death. Whatever happened in that room happened in silence. There was no struggle. Just a nurse administering a medication that had not been ordered. Before we analyze the crash, we must understand the weapon. To truly appreciate the forensic science of this case, we have to look at a flower, the foxglove, Digitalis purpurea. It is a beautiful, bell-shaped flower that grows wild in the woods. For centuries, herbalists knew that this plant held a potent secret. From this plant, we derive the drug digoxin. I want you to visualize the human heart as an engine. It relies on a precise electrical system to fire the pistons, the ventricles in a perfect rhythm. Squeeze, relax, squeeze, relax. This rhythm is governed by the flow of calcium and potassium in and out of the heart cells. Digoxin is a mechanic that tinkers with this flow. Used correctly, in microdoses, it forces the heart muscle to hold on to calcium. This makes the squeeze harder. It makes the heart beat with more authority. For a patient with heart failure, digoxin is a lifeline. It turns a sputtering engine into a strong one. But here is the catch. The therapeutic window, the difference between a cure and a poison, is microscopically small. If you introduce too much digoxin, the mechanic stops tuning the engine and starts smashing it with a wrench. The calcium floods the cells. The electrical signals that tell the heart when to beat become confused. Instead of a strong, steady thump, the heart begins to shudder. It beats when it shouldn't. It pauses when it should beat. This is called an arrhythmia. The chaos builds until the heart, overwhelmed by conflicting signals, simply gives up. It creates a storm within the chest. But to the observer standing outside, there is no lightning. There is no thunder. There is just a patient who suddenly looks very tired. A patient whose color drains away. This weapon choice tells us everything about the criminal psychology of the offender. He chose a weapon that mimics natural death. He chose a weapon that is already present in a hospital. He didn't bring a gun to work. He turned the medicine cabinet into an armory. And here is the micro hook for you to consider. Digoxin takes time to work. It isn't instantaneous like cyanide. You administer it, and then you wait. It can take an hour, 2 hours. This gave Charles Cullen a narrative gap. He could administer the fatal dose, finish his shift, clock out, and be driving home on the highway when the chaos finally began. He could distance himself from the event, both physically and psychologically. Let's return to Reverend Gall's room. It is morning now. The sun is trying to break through the overcast New Jersey sky. The night shift is handing over to the day shift. Charles Cullen has left the building. Reverend Gall is drinking his coffee, and then he isn't. The crash didn't happen like it does in the movies. There were no dramatic gasps for air, no clutching of the chest. It was a slow, confusing slide into darkness. The heart monitor, which had been ticking like a metronome, began to skip. The nurses rushed in. "Mr. Gall, can you hear me?" He was lethargic, confused. His heart rate dropped. Then it spiked. Then it dropped again. The doctors were baffled. I want you to feel the texture of their confusion. These are highly trained professionals. They look at data, they make a diagnosis, and they apply a treatment. It is a logical process. A leads to B, but here A led to Z. They looked at his chart. Did he have a heart attack? No, the enzymes were normal. Is it a pulmonary embolism? No, his lungs were clear. Is it an infection? No fever. They were fighting a ghost. They were trying to treat a condition that didn't exist in the natural world. They administered atropine to speed up the heart. It worked for a moment, then failed. They started CPR. They pushed epinephrine. Imagine the physical sensation of performing CPR, the breaking of ribs, the exhaustion, the desperate desire to bring someone back who should not be dying. Reverend Florian Gall died surrounded by people who were fighting for him, but who were fighting blindfolded. They couldn't save him because they didn't know what they were fighting. When they called the time of death, the room fell into that heavy, sterile silence that only exists in hospitals. The doctors stripped off their gloves. They shook their heads. They wrote cardiac arrest on the death certificate. And that should have been the end of it. In 99% of cases, that is the end of it. An old man with a bad heart died. It is sad, but it is not a crime. But the universe has a way of leaving crumbs. The body keeps the score, even if we don't know how to read it yet. A routine blood test had been drawn just before Reverend Gall crashed. It was sent to the lab, processed by a machine, and the results were printed out on a slip of paper that got filed away in the thick binder of his medical record. Nobody looked at it in that moment of chaos. Why would they? They were busy trying to restart his heart. But that slip of paper contained a number, a digoxin level. Reverend Gall was not prescribed digoxin. He was not taking digoxin. And yet, if someone had looked, if just one person had paused the frenetic motion of the emergency to look at the chemistry, they would have seen that his blood was saturated with it. This leads us to the open loop that will drive the next phase of our investigation. The evidence was there. The how was printed in black and white ink. But for weeks, that piece of paper sat in a folder, in a dark room, waiting for someone to turn on the light. Why do we miss the things that are right in front of us? We miss them because we trust the context. We trust the sanctuary. As we leave Reverend Gall's room, ask yourself, how many other pieces of paper are sitting in files right now, holding the secrets to a cold case that no one even knows is a crime? The storm has broken at Somerset Medical Center, but nobody knows it's raining yet. In the architecture of a hospital, the night shift creates a unique tribe. The sun goes down, the administrators go home, and the building is left to a skeleton crew who must rely entirely on one another. It is a world of shared coffee, hushed conversations. and the specific vulnerability that comes from being awake when the rest of the hemisphere is asleep. To understand the betrayal that sits at the center of this sleep story, we must first understand the love. Enter Amy Lochran. I want you to build a profile for Amy. She is a traveling nurse, a traveler. In the medical field, travelers are often outsiders, mercenaries hired to plug holes in staffing schedules. They come and go. But Amy was different. She was warm, capable, and deeply exhausted. She was a single mother, raising 2 daughters. She was also hiding a secret of her own. She suffered from cardiomyopathy, a heart condition that left her breathless and weak. She was a nurse who needed nursing, working 12-hour shifts to keep her health insurance, risking her life to save others. And then there was Charlie. To Amy, Charles Cullen was not a suspect in a criminal psychology textbook. He was her best friend. He was the anchor in the storm of the ICU. When Amy was too weak to lift a patient, Charlie was there to take the weight. When she was frightened about her health, Charlie listened. He was gentle. He was funny in a dry, self-deprecating way. He came to her house. He knew her children. This is the domestic noir element of our story. The horror isn't that a stranger broke in. The horror is that you invited him in, and he made you tea. They shared the intimacy of the graveyard shift. They ordered food together. They complained about the doctors. They built a bond that felt unbreakable because it was forged in the high-pressure environment of critical care. Amy trusted Charlie with her life, literally. If she had collapsed on the floor, he was the one she wanted running the code. As you listen to the rain, think about the person in your life you trust the most. The one who knows your passwords. The one who knows your fears. Now, try to introduce the idea that this person is quietly killing people in the room next to you. Your brain will reject it. It creates a cognitive dissonance that is physically painful. This is why the crimes went on for so long. The mask was not just a disguise, it was a relationship. But even the most perfect mask has a hairline fracture. In forensic history, we often look for the leakage, the moment where the internal reality slips out into the external world. For Amy, the realization didn't come in a flood. It came in droplets. It started with the codes. When a code blue is called when a patient's heart stops, the atmosphere in a hospital room changes instantly. It becomes a place of controlled chaos. Adrenaline spikes. Voices are sharp. There is a collective, desperate energy focused on pulling a human being back from the ledge of death. Nurses, even experienced ones, feel this. They feel the loss when a patient dies. They feel the exhaustion. But watch Charlie. Amy began to notice something subtle. When the alarms screamed, when the room was filled with the frantic energy of resuscitation, Charles Cullen was different. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't sad. He stood back, often with his arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. In criminal psychology, we analyze affect, the outward expression of emotion. Charlie's affect was flat. But if you looked closer, as Amy eventually did, there was something else. A detachment, almost a curiosity. He looked like a mechanic listening to an engine he had just tuned, waiting to see if it would stall. He wasn't participating in the emotional reality of the death. He was observing it. There was a specific incident, a moment that didn't make the headlines but haunts the memory. A patient died, a woman who should have recovered. The team was devastated. Amy was crying, and Charlie, he was calm. He offered comfort, but it felt rehearsed. It felt like he was reading lines from a script he had memorized but didn't understand. This is the behavioral red flag. It is not an overt act of violence. It is an absence of humanity where humanity should be most abundant, and here creates a narrative gap for us. What was he thinking in those moments? Was he feeling power? Was he feeling relief? Or was he feeling nothing at all, a void that could only be filled by the act of extinguishing a light? We must now pivot from the psychological to the mechanical. We need to look at the machine again, the Pyxis. This creates the foundation of our evidence. The detectives, led by two tenacious investigators we will meet shortly, began to look at the logs. They found a pattern that made no sense. The Pyxis med station is designed to be a fortress. It is a computerized drug cabinet. To get a medication, you must 1. Log in with your ID. 2. Select the patient's name. 3. Select the medication. 4. The specific drawer pops open. 5. You take the medication. 6. You close the drawer. The system records the withdrawal. It bills the patient. It tracks the inventory. But the logs for Charles Cullen showed thousands of cancellations. Here is the mechanism of the crime. Charlie would log in. He would select a patient, often a patient he wasn't even assigned to. He would select a drug. Digoxin, insulin, epinephrine. He would request the drawer to open, and then he would hit cancel. Why? In the older systems, there was a lag, or perhaps a design oversight. When the request was made, the drawer popped open. If the nurse immediately hit cancel, the computer recorded the transaction as canceled, error. It assumed the nurse had changed their mind or pressed the wrong button, but the drawer was already open. Charlie could reach in, take the lethal vial, and then close the drawer. To the machine, nothing had been taken. The inventory count would be off, yes, but in a busy hospital, inventory counts are often off. Dropped pills, broken vials, miscounts. He was exploiting a blind spot in the digital architecture. He was creating a ghost transaction. He did this hundreds of times. Not just once or twice a week, multiple times a shift. He was withdrawing drugs that stop hearts, drugs that lower blood sugar to fatal levels, and he was canceling the transactions. This is the forensic breakthrough that changes the perspective. It wasn't just that patients were dying. It was that the instrument of their death was being stolen in plain sight through a loophole that relied on the assumption that nurses are honest. And here is the strange detail, the catch that makes this even more chilling. When the investigators finally looked at his user history, they didn't just see cancellations. They saw browsing. Charles Cullen spent hours looking up patients he wasn't treating. He would scroll through the list of admissions. He would check the census in the ICU, the CCU, the emergency room. He was window shopping. He was looking for victims. He wasn't targeting enemies. He wasn't seeking revenge. He was simply looking for availability. Who is vulnerable? Who is alone? Who has a central line IV that allows for easy access? This behavior, this digital stalking, went on for years. And because the system was designed to track billing, not behavior, nobody flagged it. The machine didn't care that Nurse Cullen was looking at a patient in a different wing. It only cared if he billed them for an aspirin. Now, I want to pause the narrative. I want to speak directly to you. You are lying in the dark, safe in your bed. But I want you to engage your mind in a hypothetical exercise. We call this the sleepy juror prompt. Imagine your workplace. Imagine your closest colleague, the one you eat lunch with, the one who knows about your family, the one who covers for you when you are running late. Now, imagine you see a discrepancy in their work, a number that doesn't add up, a missing file, a strange behavior during a crisis. What is your first thought? Is it murder? Of course not. Your brain will offer you 1,000 other explanations first. They are tired. It's a glitch. I must be seeing things wrong. They made a mistake. We are wired for trust. We are wired to protect our tribe. To suspect a friend of being a monster requires us to break our own reality. It requires us to admit that we are unsafe, that our judgment is flawed, and that the world is much darker than we want to believe. Amy Loughran was standing on the edge of this precipice. She was looking at the logs. She was remembering the flat affect during the codes. She was holding two incompatible truths in her hands. Charlie is my friend, and Charlie is killing people. At what point does loyalty become complicity? At what point do you have to let go of the hand you are holding because you realize it is stained with blood? As we move into the next phase, we will watch Amy make the hardest choice of her life. She has to decide whether to stay in the warm illusion of friendship or step into the cold rain of the truth. When an investigation finally breaks the surface of a hospital's polished exterior, it moves like a slow-motion collision. On one side, you have the momentum of the truth. On the other, you have the inertia of the institution. Detectives Danny Baldwin and Tim Braun enter the frame. I want you to visualize them not as action movie cops, but as patient, methodical men in wrinkled suits. They are the personification of criminal psychology in the field. They arrived at Somerset Medical Center with a single, undeniable piece of evidence: the toxicology report of Reverend Florian Gall. It was a forensic anomaly. The report showed levels of digoxin that were not just high, but impossible for a human body to produce or tolerate naturally. It was a chemical signature of an outside hand. Baldwin and Braun are competent. They see the pattern immediately. They look at the Pyxis logs we discussed earlier, the thousands of cancellations, and they realize they aren't looking at a medical error. They are looking at a serial killer who has been hiding in plain sight for 16 years. But here is where the reality of the American medical system becomes a roadblock. When the detectives presented their findings to the hospital administration, they didn't meet with open arms. They met the doctor archetype, the risk management executives, whose primary loyalty is not to the deceased, but to the brand. The hospital administrators cite peer review protections. They redact documents until the pages are more black ink than white paper. They claim that sharing certain data would violate patient privacy or expose the hospital to litigation. It is a frustrating, bureaucratic game of chess. The very systems designed to protect lives are now being used as a shield for the predator who ended them. Think about the position this puts you in. If you were Baldwin or Braun, watching the clock tick while knowing a killer is still on the floor, how would you navigate a system that treats a mass murderer as a confidential personnel matter? The killer is being protected by the paperwork, and the detectives are being starved of the oxygen they need to make an arrest. There is only one person who can bypass the bureaucracy: Amy Lochran. In an act of profound bravery that few of us can truly imagine, Amy agrees to work with the detectives. She is no longer just a nurse, she is the inside man. She agrees to wear a wire. I want you to feel the physical weight of that decision. She has a heart condition, her pulse is already fragile, and yet she straps a recording device to her chest and walks back into the sanctuary to face her best friend. She is the only one he trusts. She is the only one who can bridge the narrative gap. The confrontation happens in the hospital cafeteria. It isn't a dramatic showdown with shouting or accusations. It is a quiet, agonizingly slow conversation over lukewarm coffee. Amy looks at Charlie, the man who has sat at her kitchen table, and asks him about the deaths. She mentions the investigation. She gives him an opening to confess, to explain, to be the friend she thought he was. But Charlie doesn't break. In this field, this is known as stonewalling. He doesn't get angry. He doesn't deny it with passion. He simply deflects. He stares at her with those sad, hollow eyes. He uses silence as a weapon. Every time Amy pushes for a why, Charlie retreats further into his shell. The tension isn't in what is said. It's in the suffocating silence between the sentences. He knows she's different. He senses the shift in the air. The intimacy they shared is being replaced by a cold, clinical distance, and for the first time, the good nurse looks like a stranger. Let's pause our breath for a moment and look at the forensic science that Charles Cullen thought he could outrun. While digoxin was his primary tool, he also used insulin. Insulin is a master of disguise. It occurs naturally in every human body. If a person dies with high insulin, a coroner might assume their pancreas simply malfunctioned. In most cases, insulin disappears from the blood shortly after death, leaving no trace for a standard autopsy. However, science has a way of finding the ghost. When the human body produces insulin naturally, it also produces a byproduct called C-peptide. Think of it like the sawdust left over after a carpenter cuts a piece of wood. If the insulin is natural, the C-peptide will be there in equal measure. But synthetic insulin, the kind in a hospital vial, does not contain C-peptide. When a victim is found with massive levels of insulin but zero C-peptide, the investigation has its smoking gun. It is the chemical fingerprint of murder. It proves that the substance didn't come from within. It was forced in from the outside. Charles Cullen was meticulous, but he couldn't hide the absence of the ghost. He couldn't erase the chemical void he left in his victim's veins. The detectives finally have enough. It isn't the perfect case yet, but they have enough for a technical arrest related to the medication thefts and the suspicious death of Reverend Gall. They take Charles Cullen into custody. There is a sense of relief in the air. The predator is out of the sanctuary. The halls of Somerset are, for the first time in months, truly safe. But the relief is short-lived. We are now in the interrogation room. I want you to watch this through the lens of a forensic psychologist. Charlie is sitting in a metal chair. He isn't handcuffed to the table. He is just sitting. Baldwin and Braun are using every technique in the book. They are being good cops. They are offering him empathy. They are trying to get him to talk about his childhood, his pain, his mercy. And Charlie says nothing. For 7 hours, he sits in near total stasis. He doesn't move. He doesn't ask for a lawyer. He doesn't ask for water. He simply exists in a state of absolute withdrawal. This is the ultimate open loop. Without a confession, the case against him is built on circumstantial digital logs and a single toxicology report. In a court of law, a skilled lawyer could argue those away as system errors or administrative lapses. Without his voice, the victims remain without justice. He is a stone wall, and the detectives are running out of time. As we approach the end of this phase, I want you to consider a question that has no easy answer. Charles Cullen often suggested, in his few brief utterances, that what he did was an act of mercy. He claimed he wanted to end the suffering of the very sick, but the evidence shows he killed people who were recovering. He killed people who were joking. He killed people who were going home. If a killer believes his own lie, does that make him more or less dangerous than one who knows he is evil? We are watching a psychological wrestling match. On one side, the detectives trying to pull a confession into the light. On the other, a man who has displaced his guilt so deeply that he may no longer even feel it. As you drift closer to sleep, imagine the weight on Amy Loughran's shoulders. She is the only one who can break that stone wall. She is the only one he loves. The detectives realize that they have to send her in one last time. They have to ask a woman with a failing heart to walk into a room and break the heart of a monster. Would you do it? Would you risk your own physical survival to ensure that a friend never walks free again? The cold case is thawing, but the water is freezing. In the next hour, we will see the mask finally crumble. Not through force, but through the only thing Charles Cullen ever truly feared: the loss of the only person who ever truly saw him. We have reached the final hour of our forensic investigation. The clock on the wall of the Somerset County Prosecutor's Office marks the passage of time in slow, agonizing ticks. In the center of the room sits Charles Cullen. He is a man who has mastered the art of being a vacuum, a space where information goes in, but nothing comes out. The detectives, Baldwin and Braun, have reached a stalemate. They have used the pressure of the law, the weight of the evidence, and the logic of the Pixis logs. But Charlie is not a man who fears the law. To understand his psychology, you must realize that he has spent his entire life feeling like a victim of the world. You cannot threaten a man who believes he is already in a cage. So, they change the game. They stop acting like interrogators. They stop leaning forward with aggressive questions. Instead, they lean back. They soften their voices. They begin to act like nurses. They offer him a blanket. They offer him a cup of water held with both hands. They speak to him about the burden of his work. They acknowledge the pain he must have seen. In the field of criminal psychology, this is a shift toward cognitive displacement. If they can make Charlie feel like he is back in the hospital, back in the sanctuary, he might start to act like the good nurse again. And the good nurse is someone who helps. The good nurse is someone who explains. But they need a catalyst. They need Amy. Amy Lochran enters the room. She is exhausted. Her own heart is struggling, the cardiomyopathy making every breath a conscious effort. She sits across from the man she thought she knew. She doesn't yell. She doesn't call him a monster. Instead, she uses the most powerful tool in the human arsenal, empathy. She leans in and tells him, "Charlie, I know you're a good person. I know you were trying to help. It is the ultimate trap." She is appealing to the lie he has told himself for 16 years. She is offering him a version of reality where he isn't a serial killer, but a misunderstood savior. It is a psychological chess move of breathtaking complexity. If he admits to the acts to help her understand, he admits to the murders. The lights in the room seem to dim as the sun sets outside. Dust motes float in the single shaft of light from the hallway, suspended in the air like the souls of the people he took. Charlie looks at Amy. For the first time, the stone wall cracks. His voice, when it finally comes, is a flat, dry monotone. It has no highs, no lows, no tremors of guilt. It is the sound of a machine reporting data. He begins to speak about the patients. But listen closely to the way he describes them. He didn't remember their names. He didn't remember the families who cried at their bedsides. He didn't remember the color of their eyes. To him, they were not people. They were situations. They were problems that needed to be solved. This is the impossible realization. We want to believe that a man who kills hundreds of people is driven by a grand, cinematic passion. We want it to be about money, or a dark thrill, or a twisted ritual. But for Charles Cullen, the reality was much more hollow. He claimed he killed to save them. He viewed the hospital, the very sanctuary we discussed at the beginning of our journey, as a torture chamber. He believed the doctors were keeping people alive just to suffer. He saw himself as the only one with the courage to end the pain. He viewed himself as the angel of mercy. But, as the detectives pushed further, the mercy narrative began to fall apart. He confessed to killing people who were not in pain. He confessed to killing people who were healthy. When they asked him why he stopped, why he finally hit a wall, he didn't say it was because he felt remorse. He didn't say it was because he realized it was wrong. He looked at the detectives, his face a mask of absolute detachment, and said, "Because I ran out of time." Think about that sentence as you drift toward sleep. Because I ran out of time. It wasn't a choice to stop. It was a logistical failure. If he hadn't been caught, if the Pyxis logs hadn't been scrutinized, if Amy hadn't worn that wire, he would be in a different hospital tonight. He would be walking a different hallway. He would be standing over a different bed, holding a vial of digoxin in his hand, waiting for the silence of the night shift. The cure was the weapon. The good nurse was the predator. The sanctuary was the hunting ground. This is the Noir diagnosis of the case. We created a system that prioritized efficiency and privacy over transparency and safety. We built a world where a man could kill for 16 years because nobody wanted to believe that the person helping them was actually the person hurting them. The trap was finally sprung. Amy's empathy, the very thing that made her a great nurse, was the bait. She had to use her own heart to catch a man who didn't have one. As she walked out of that room, she collapsed. The strain of the investigation had nearly killed her. But she had done what 9 hospitals and a decade of bureaucracy could not. She had stopped the clock. As we conclude this sleep story, let us move away from the darkness of the interrogation room and back into the light of the living. Charles Cullen is currently serving 11 consecutive life sentences. He will never walk the halls of a hospital again. He will never hold the hand of a patient. He is a ghost in the system, a name in a cold case file that finally found its resolution. But the story doesn't end with him. It ends with the names we must remember: Reverend Florian Gall, Mary Burry, Ottomar Schramm, the hundreds of others whose names were never called out in a courtroom but whose lives were cut short in the quiet of the night. I want you to imagine a candle for each of them, a small, flickering flame in the darkness. We often focus on the why of the killer. We spend hours analyzing the criminal psychology of the antagonist. But tonight, as you find rest, I want you to focus on the how of the survivors. Think of Amy Lochran, who is still alive today, a testament to the power of human intuition and the courage to face a terrifying truth. Think of the detectives who refused to be turned away by redacted documents. Think of the families who finally received a phone call, years late, telling them that their loved one's death was not an accident of nature, but an act of man. The world is dark, yes, but the darkness is only visible because of the light. The hospital is still a sanctuary. For every Charles Cullen, there are 10,000 nurses who stay late because they care, who hold hands because they feel, and who protect life because it is sacred. The impossible contradiction of this case is that it took a good nurse to catch a bad one. It took the best of humanity to stop the worst. The rain has stopped now. The pavement outside is wet and dark, reflecting the streetlights like a black mirror. The city is still asleep. You have been a silent observer in this investigation. You have sat in the passenger seat. You have watched the monitors. You have looked into the digital footprint of a killer. As you transition into sleep, let the details of the digoxin and the Pyxis machines fade away. Let the quantitative dread of the numbers dissolve. What remains is a simple truth. We are all connected by the trust we place in one another. That trust is fragile, yes, but it is also what makes us human. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more interesting videos. Take a deep breath. Feel the weight of your blankets. You are safe. The lights are on in the hospitals, and the real guardians are on duty. The night shift nurse is a story of the past, a lesson in the architecture of evil, and a reminder to always look for the truth in the silence. Close your eyes. The case is closed. The records are filed. The world is quiet. Sleep now.